And before we come to a close here, we'll turn focus to another area that has massive implications for Israel, Ukraine, and Jewish communities worldwide: education. It's, of course, played a key role in preserving the Jewish religion, culture, values, and history over the centuries. And it's also crucial in fighting the anti-Semitism that has persisted throughout the centuries and is still alive and well today. And now we welcome back Chief Rabbi of Ukraine, Yaakov Bleich. Also joining this conversation on education and technology are Bishop Dr. Boris Gudziak, President of Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv, and Dan Green, Director General and CEO of World ORT. Rabbi Bleich, let me start with you. Can you tell us how, in your eyes, in your experience, how Jewish education in Ukraine has really changed during your time there over the last 30 years?
Yeah, changed. First of all, thank you very, very much and for hosting this beautiful forum and this great panel. Jewish education didn't exist during the time of the Soviet Union. So it changed a lot over the last 30 years since the Soviet Union ceased to exist. Ukraine became independent and immediately Jewish schools started opening with government support. I think that it's the most important element of community building is Jewish education. If we don't have young ones, we won't have elders. That's something that our sages taught us. Im ein gdayim lo yu tiashim. So this is very, very important for us to build a community on the basis of Jewish education. I think it's much stronger and it makes the community much stronger since you have young people growing up and learning about the Jewish identity. What's interesting is that Jewish identity, I always say, was very strong even under the Soviet Union. But under the Soviet Union, that Jewish identity, which was very strong, was a negative identity. People were embarrassed. They suffered for being Jewish. However, ultimately, that is what caused them to send their children to Jewish schools, to learn the positive identity and learn what Judaism really means and what it means for them. I would say 100% of the Jewish children that came to Jewish schools in the first years of Ukrainian independence came because their parents suffered for being Jewish. And the parents wanted them to have a positive experience being Jewish and to understand their Judaism. So there's no question about it that Jewish education is what helped create a strong and vibrant Jewish community in Ukraine. And indeed, I think throughout the world, I think that that's the most important element of any community is the Jewish education part.
Well, on that note, I want to ask Dr. Gudziak, your university recently created a Jewish studies program there. I mean, tell us a little bit about that program itself and really the thought process behind its establishment.
The Jewish Studies program at the Ukrainian Catholic University has behind it a deep conviction that we are brothers in the human race, brothers and sisters, Christians and Jews, and that the Jews are our older brothers in kind of the biblical faith, and that there is incredibly rich, sometimes dramatic, sometimes tragic, but also promising history and legacy of the life of Christians and Jews on this land. So this program has three components. There's the comparative Christian and Jewish study of the Tanakh, what Christians call the Old Testament. Then there is, and that is headed by the Dean of the Theology Faculty, Father Yuri Shurko. Then there's a program on Jewish Ukrainian history in Ukraine, headed by one of the top public intellectuals of Ukraine, Professor Yaroslav Hrytsak. And then a program of contemporary Ukrainian Jewish, Christian, Judaic relations. And that program is headed by the highly decorated former Soviet dissident, Miroslav Marinovich. And so these programs foster conferences, research, publications, but also classwork for students in different programs. The Ukrainian Catholic University has spurred the interest of young people in Yiddish. We have some students that are doing doctoral degrees, writing dissertations on topics of Jewish history in Ukraine. So this has been an important kind of priority in the university's attempt to help people in the 21st century, especially in this part of the world, have an authentic, rich, multifaceted, non-deprived self-awareness.
And what an important initiative that is. I want to come back to that in just a moment. But first, Mr. Green, let me ask you, I mean, it's really hard to talk about education, certainly education and technology today, without thinking about COVID, the post-COVID, if we can say that even, impact on education. What have you witnessed in terms of the impact on your Jewish schools and colleges in Israel and in the diaspora?
Thank you, Nuria. Well, you really have to consider our network, which consists of more than 200,000 beneficiaries across more than 30 countries around the world, consisting of kindergartens, junior and high schools, technical colleges, universities, and adult learning and training centers. So the impact of COVID and the need that resulted from it really differs right across the network. But, you know, firstly, you have to talk about the response of our staff, of our teachers. The late Jonathan Sachs always called educators the heroes of the Jewish people, people who really shape our life. And all of our teachers acted so heroically during this most challenging and frightening and difficult time. But, you know, also there were unsought positives and opportunities that we found. And because of Ort and our network, our global network, we're really, I suppose our USB is about that network and about that opportunity that we provide for valuable connections. And especially, I think we saw this with our smaller and more isolated communities. We're giving young people and students the chance really to develop a sense of Jewish peoplehood by connecting so much more. We ran so many collaborative projects for students to work with their global peers, virtual summer schools, virtual 3D workshops, making animated films and many other things, and also investing our time in virtual teacher training as well, and allowing our teachers, our professionals to come together and discuss issues that they were, you know, suffering from, and how to share ideas about how to move forward beyond the pandemic. But there's been so many different factors to consider for education generally at this time. And the crisis, I think, has definitely strengthened links between parents and teachers. Studies that we've seen have certainly shown that this relationship, this strengthening, certainly increases attendance and can push up results as well. So that's a positive. And another small positive that we've seen is that some students appear to have performed better while studying remotely. Perhaps those who suffer from anxiety, pupils who are shy about speaking up in class and find chat boxes less intimidating. So online learning has certainly helped some bright children who perhaps are self-motivated, enjoy learning, but find social aspects of schooling exhausting. And another significant factor to consider is coming to terms really with the size of the learning loss suffered by students. You know, realizing that many have fallen behind by being out of the classroom. So what more can we do to help them reach the levels of attainment that expected of them? And finally, I just add here, we need to really do more to develop the resilience in children, helping them cope with dramatic shocks like this. So schools really have to be helping their students to learn independently, perhaps in preparation for their future work lives where technological disruptions can be a thing of the norm. And you might have to pivot and change your career and retrain at a moment's notice. And I think this better reflects the modern workplace our students will enter when they graduate. And just to finish really here, school is so much more than just learning. The socialization side of it is huge. And we can't, you know, place enough emphasis on the fact that we want our students back in the classroom with their teachers face to face, moving away from the virtual as much as possible to get them back to that human contact.
Yeah, what a task you have to manage the impact of something that came so suddenly, and everybody really had to learn on their feet in such a dramatic way. And part of what you're saying recalls what we've also heard today in terms of even the healthcare system after COVID is flexibility and the need for more flexibility in terms of how to adjust to these kinds of scenarios. And like you said, to help those kids through it going forward. I imagine it's not the last time we'll be facing this. Let me ask you, Rabbi Bleich, when we're talking about education, there's obviously the issue of anti-Semitism, the importance of education in fighting anti-Semitism. Overall, when we're looking at Ukraine, what do you think sets apart Jewish education there versus other diaspora communities?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, and I think that this is something that has to really be taken into consideration, people ask me, what is the future of the Jewish community in Ukraine? And I like to say that the future of the Jewish community in Ukraine will be approximately similar to Jewish communities in Western Europe. However, we have one tremendous advantage over Jewish communities in Western Europe. And that is, as we began rebuilding with the independence of Ukraine 30 years ago, we immediately opened Jewish schools. And the Jewish education that we are offering to the children in our communities are the basis of rebuilding our communities. So we have a much more educated and interested community compared, let's say, to the French Jews who seek after World War II maybe to assimilate more, or the German Jews who seek to assimilate more, and the Belgian Jews, etc., in Western Europe. So even though they have Jewish education as well, but I don't think that their Jewish education came to establish and build their communities, especially in Germany, where the Jewish education there today is more of an afterthought after the emigration of Jews from the Soviet Union and former Soviet Union into Germany. So I see the education in Ukraine as a very, very strong foundation for the building of a community. And we almost do not have a community with over 10,000 members that doesn't have a Jewish day school, which is very unique for diaspora communities. And the reason is because we built our identity and our communities on education. So education is very, very important for number one. Another very important point, there is now a movement in European Jewish day schools headed by the lozhkin Foundation and other organizations, which are educating for impact, which means taking a Jewish day school and saying, what is the education for these children going to do to impact the community? Are we teaching these children that they have to be a part of the community? Or are we giving them Jewish identity, quote unquote, which does not obligate them to do anything other than to feel Jewish? When you educate for impact and you understand that you're educating Jewish children not only to feel Jewish, but to do something about it, to join their community and to make sure that their community will be a stronger and a better community, you're obviously educating not only as a goal for knowledge, but also for what we call in Ukrainian tachlis, which is that you want to get some result out of that education, which will impact the Jewish community. So Jewish schools in Ukraine are great schools. They are really strong. They have a lot of support from the government as well. They work together to strengthen the content of the education in the schools. And we have schools that are run by different organizations, including ORT and Chabad and Shema Yisrael. These are the networks that run schools in Ukraine, and they're very, very successful. And I think that they're successful because they are, like I said, they are the foundation of the community. Right. Another important point that I want to add, having heard my good friend and colleague, Metropolitan Gudziak, the fact that the Ukrainian Catholic University today has opened a Jewish studies program, something that I think would not have been possible 30 years ago or 25 years ago. It shows a lot about the social atmosphere within Ukraine today. We speak about anti-Semitism and education and how education combats anti-Semitism. There's no question about it that the fact that we are able to sit and discuss openly Jewish history in Ukraine and understand that there were good times and bad times. And even though the good times were so much stronger, more, almost out of 1,000 years, I would say that 950 years were good times and 50 years were bad times, or 50 or 60 years between all of the history of Jewish life in Ukraine. The fact that we're able to get together now and discuss these things helps us focus on the proper perspective. What have we learned from one another? And what can we learn from one another? What good things are there in our history? And this allows us to work together to combat anti-Semitism. Most anti-Semitism comes from a lack of education. And the fact that the Jews are educated in a part of society in Ukraine, the fact that Ukrainian society is developing in a democratic way, in a democratic fashion, this allows interaction and respect, and allows us to respect one another to the extent that if, God forbid, there are acts of anti-Semitism, it doesn't have to be the Jews that are speaking out against it, but it's Ukrainian society as a whole that will stand up to it. This is, I think, one of the greatest things that, Jewish education and education in general has done for Ukraine.
Yeah, that sort of harks back to the talk about the importance of interfaith initiatives that Ilan Carr was telling about earlier. I mean, what a perfect example of that. So let me take that a step further. Dr. Gudziak, as someone from inside the university, what do you think it says about Ukraine's relationship with its Jewish community that it has reached a point where a Catholic university opens a Jewish studies program?
I find Ukrainian society to be really a very flexible, dynamic, and open place. I think maybe everybody that is listening knows, but might not remember that a Ukrainian Jew is the president of this country, and 75% of Ukrainians voted for him. In fact, in 2019, there was a period when both the president and the prime minister of Ukraine were Ukrainian Jews. Besides Israel, there was no state in the world that could say that. The head of government and the head of state were Jews in Ukraine. And the current president remains. It's just half of his 5-year term. I think it's, we're living in a world where a holistic approach to life, to the human being, looking at a person to be educated, not only as a brain, as a computer that needs to be programmed, but somebody with a heart, with a soul, with a body, with a culture. And looking at that person in the context of a local and global society. Today, we can't live without a healthy awareness of our brothers and sisters who are very diverse in this world. And our Christian calling, our spiritual calling, our human calling is to live in peace, to live in harmony, to live in a way that fosters creativity and livelihood I was born and raised in the United States, did most of my studies there, but also in Western Europe. And I found the experience of developing a Catholic university, the only Catholic university between Japan and Poland, kind of in the northern Eurasian landmass, to be a fantastic experience. I don't think this kind of university could have been developed in too many places or too many countries. There's a lot still to do. There's deep post-genocidal, post-totalitarian trauma. I mean, at least 15 million people were killed in Ukraine between 1919 and 1955. It was the most dangerous place on earth between 1932 and 1945. For Ukrainians, for Jews, for Poles living here, for Russians, for Gypsies, etc. It was a place where the brown and red totalitarians met, clashed, and we see right now, today, there's a very important moment. I didn't hear yet the results of the Putin-Biden conversation, but the danger is not gone. So the fear, which almost became genetic from this wave after wave of genocide, this generation after generation of totalitarianism, this trauma needs to be cured, and that can only be cured by healthy relationships, by love, by really respecting the dignity of the other person. And every person is created in God's image and likeness. And that is what I think the Maidans, the two Ukrainian revolutions, the Orange Revolution and the Revolution of Dignity showed. When all ethnic backgrounds and all religious confessions were together, standing up for human dignity. And I think this really put a stamp on the future of Ukraine. This is the kind of Ukraine people want in this country, at least the majority of people.
It's a beautiful example, I think, that others can learn from too, and beautifully put in how you described it, that deep trauma, and that actually to move forward, you have to face it, to face history, which Ukraine has certainly done over the past few decades. The independent Ukraine, and then to learn about each other and be willing to know the other, so to speak, and not sort of, push it aside and put it under the rug. So I think that's a really beautiful example and a beautiful way to start to bring this forum to a close. And before we do that, Mr. Green, let me just ask you about how your schools, also on a sort of practical level, combine Jewish studies, Jewish curricula with the more generalized studies.
Well, two of our core values at World Or are Tikkun Olam and Tikkun Am. And most of us are familiar with the concept of Tikkun Olam around social justice, humanitarian aid, and having a global worldview to solving these issues around the environment, sustainability, and equality. And World Or embraces this, as do our students and all our programs. But we also want our students to be equally committed to Hebrew culture, to Klal Yisrael, and to Jewish practice. And this fusion, if you like, of our two core values perhaps underlines the balance that we have to strike in many of our schools around the world, and nowhere really more so, I suppose, than in Ukraine and across the former Soviet Union. And by investing in Tikkun Am, this kind of strengthening and flourishing of Jewish people, we're enabling the sustainable flourishing of Jewish people through identity, culture, community, religion, and state. We're engaging young people as proud, knowledgeable, and engaged Jews, building Jewish identity, community, and leadership development. And that ultimately leads, I think, to a sustainable diaspora community. Because for all schools in this region, they really are often the primary source of Jewish affiliation for many students and their families. So how do we get them in? Because we find across the former Soviet Union that many Jewish parents are motivated first by the best possible education, only second by the Jewish component. So we have to compete every time with the very best citywide schools to attract Jewish families. And that's our challenge and ensures our commitment to excellence. And once we have the students, then the magic can start. The Jewish spark is rekindled, and soon the flame burns brightly as the child returns home with Shabbat songs and Hanukkah dreidels and brachot and questions. And soon the parents and grandparents have also caught fire, and the Jewish flame, often hidden for generations, sits proudly represented as Shabbat candles every Friday night, or the Havdalah flame, or 8 candles on the menorah. So we have to fuse that Jewish experience with what we're known for, our excellence in science and technology and STEM education today. And that mix of STEM and Yiddishkeit for us is really that perfect recipe in order to ensure that we can build our Jewish communities, ensure that Jewish families choose our schools so that they can go home with that love of Judaism and Yiddishkeit.
Well, Mr. Dan Green, Bishop Dr. Boris Gudziak, and Rabbi Bleich, thank you all so much for this conversation. I have to say it's a pleasure to hear many words of encouragement and examples to help bring this two-day forum to an end. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much.
God bless you. Thank you.